Okay, everybody, welcome to the Shiur. We're going to be giving a three-part series on Parshat HaShavua, the weekly Torah portion. And this particular Torah portion is Matot. So the way that's being read this year, this is the penultimate Parsha of the book of Bamidbar. It's the next to the last. Many times, depending upon the configuration of the calendar of that year, this actually would be the final Torah reading because Matot and Maseh would be combined together, this week's Torah portion, last week's Torah portion. So that's true in sort of a technical way of how the Torah reading is divided up over the course of the year. But in a conceptual way, this week's Parsha really gives us the feel that we're at the end of the book of Bamidbar. Now, I want you to sort of appreciate that globally. At the beginning of the book of Bamidbar, we started the rather unpleasant narrative of the Jewish people's trials and tribulations in the course of the desert. And we started with the beginning of the experience in the desert. And we're now going to end the book of Bamidbar with the Jewish people poised to enter into the land of Israel. And indeed, the focus of today's discussion will be the first actual taking possession of Eretz Israel, or sort of an extension of Eretz Israel, which is involved in the land on the eastern side of the Jordan River, where the tribes of Reuven and Gad come with a request to Moshe that they want to settle there. This might be an episode which is familiar, on some level at least, to most of you, and I hope you'll be able to understand this episode better. So we're actually closing the 40 years now. We started with the beginning of the 40 years, and we're ending now with the conquest of the land. I'll ask you a question. Since the book of Bamidbar, when I say I ask you a question, it means I really do want you to answer. I know it's always a weird feeling over the internet. You know, should I actually say something? And warning, you'll be recorded for posterity. Millions of people throughout the universe will be watching this video as it goes viral. So that's not to discourage you from speaking. I want you to speak. So I'm going to ask you a question. When you think of this 40-year period in the desert, what would you consider to be sort of the ultimate crisis which precipitated the 40-year endurance, this very trying experience of the 40 years? What precipitated that the Jewish people being there for 40 years? Go ahead. Don't be shy. So, I'm sorry?
The golden calf?
Okay, so I'm so glad you said that, because it's not true. But that's what I wanted people to say. Thank you. That was good, because when you think of a sort of a spiritual crisis, it's hard to think of anything worse than this collective worship of the Egel HaZahav, of the golden calf. But interestingly enough, what was the punishment of the worship of the golden calf? People were killed, right? People were executed. And there's some perhaps element of the punishment of the golden calf which lasts forever. And when we're punished in the future, there's sort of an element of that golden calf worship, which is sort of, we're paying off dues. But interestingly enough, in a kind of more micro level, that incident happened. It was profoundly tragic, and it was dealt with. But there's another crisis which actually precipitated the entire 40 years. The 40 years wouldn't have happened if it were not for this crisis, which I'm very subtly alluding to. And that crisis is?
Sorry. The sin of the Meraglim.
Thank you. The sin of the spies, of the Meraglim. So when the spies are sent to the land of Israel, remember, that's in the beginning of the 40 years. The spies are sent in, because the whole conception originally was that the Jewish people would leave Egypt. We receive at Mount Sinai our kind of constitution, right? That's the Torah. And then a constitution is the vision upon which we're then supposed to build then Jewish society in our homeland, in the land of Israel. So there's supposed to be this march, which would begin with the exodus from Egypt, stop at Mount Sinai, get our constitution, and continue that march into the land of Israel and establish this Torah society. Of course, it got derailed, and it got derailed because of the sin of the spies. So when you take a look at the book of Bamidbar and you look at it thematically, the tragic thread which weaves itself throughout the 40 years of wandering in the desert is this hovering over our heads of this incredible tragedy of the spies. Now we're reaching the end of that period. The entire generation that had left Egypt, right, except for the children, so they're gone. And
I thought the women were still alive.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's true. Oh my, I'm so bad. You see that? Men only think about men. Thank you. So the bad guys were gone. And now the Jewish people are poised to enter into the land of Israel. The apparently irreparable defect that was within that generation that was demoralized by the spies, I say irreparable because that's why they had to die out. That's how the Rambam explains it, that there was a flaw in their character that was not reparable. There had to be a new type of character and personality that would be steel in the adversity of the wandering in the desert, and that generation now would be constitutionally able. I mean, constitutional in the sense of the document of the Constitution, but inner constitution, constitutionally able to enter the land of Israel, conquer the land of Israel, and settle there and create a Torah society based upon the blueprint, the Constitution, which we received at Har Sinai. So this is so exciting because we're at the end of Bamidbar, and now it's going to happen. The Jewish people is a new nation now. It's the nation which has been steeled in adversity of the desert. Hopefully, their faith in God has been cultivated by all of the providential care that they received in those very harsh conditions of the desert, and now they can enter into the land of Israel. So keep that in mind in sort of the macro. Now, for those of you, I hope all of you have your source sheets here, but I have a little map there, and you can see the land of Israel with all the tribal allocations there. So the Jewish people are on the east bank of the Jordan River, poised to go into the land. Now, what I want to do is a very superficial overview of the events which now take place. I want to subsequently go into great depth on. So, on the most superficial level, now we're going to go, don't be alarmed because we're going to go much deeper into this. 2 tribes, later becoming 2.5. We'll figure out how that happened a little bit later. These 2 tribes, Reuven and Gad, come before Moshe, and they say that they have a lot of cattle, and this is good cattle land on the east bank of the Jordan River, and they'd like to stay there. But the idea was to cross over the Jordan and to conquer the land, which is on the west bank of the Jordan River. So they say they want to stay where they are because it's good for business. So Moshe becomes very upset about this. We'll spend a lot of time discussing why Moshe becomes so profoundly upset. So Reuven and Gad, those 2 tribes, responding to Moshe's being upset, they reformulate their request. The reformulation is that they will go into the land of Israel, they will cross the Jordan River, they'll participate in the conquest with their brothers, and then they will go back and settle on the lands that are east of the Jordan River. Moshe seems to superficially accept their reformulation of the request. And then this episode ends by listing the cities and territories which were given to them and established by them on the east bank of the Jordan River. So that's a bird's eye view of this episode that we're going to go into depth on. So far, so good? Just nod your head or say yes, anything.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Now, I'd like to ask 3 questions. One question is, why is it that these 2 tribes particularly made the request that they made to stay on the east bank of the Jordan River? Question number one. Question number two, how do we explain Moshe's incredibly vociferous response to their request? He really explodes with a passionate negativity in response to their request. Why? And then the third question is, does this story have a happy ending? When you read it superficially, it seems to have a happy ending. There's sort of a negotiation which goes on between Moshe and the tribes of Reuben and God, and Moshe and the tribes reach a certain kind of understanding, and the understanding is fulfilled. So does the story really have a happy ending? So those are the three questions. Now, let's start with the first question, which is why these tribes in particular? Now, let me sensitize you to why this is even a question. After all, you could say, what do you mean? They come to Moshe and they explain why. They say that they have a lot of cattle. But if you think about it for a second, it's not like nowadays with a contemporary economic structure in which there are doctors and lawyers and accountants and nurses and educators and physical therapists, and people have all kinds of different professions with all different types of needs and training, etc. When you live in an agricultural society or a nomadic society, in this particular case, they couldn't really become farmers because they're essentially wandering. So everybody is in the cattle business, right? So why Reuven and God have this particular request? Everybody was in the same business. So I'd like to share with you what perhaps is the most straightforward answer to this question, but perhaps there's a different way of explaining it, which maybe we'll understand better by the time we're done. So the Or HaChaim, Rabbi Chaim Ibn Attar, who is a North African rabbi, great Kabbalist, profound commentator on the Torah, he says the following. So it's the source number is the first source on your page, right under the map. Okay, so he says the following. Umikne Rav, when they come to explain to Moshe why they want to settle in that land, they say, we have a lot of cattle. So the Or HaChaim explains, Tam Hodazo, why is it that they had to explain they have a lot of cattle? They had to justify why they want to stay where they are. Explain it. I mean, it wouldn't be good to say, we're a bunch of cowards and we don't want to participate in the battle conquering the lands to the west of the Jordan River. So do you mind if we sort of just stay here? So no, they explained why. It's economic reasons. Vitam shahaya lehem yoter mikol hashvatim. Now the question that we asked. Now, what's the reason that they had more cattle than any of the other tribes? Wasn't everybody in the cattle business? So the Or HaChaim explains, Liot shahayu giburei choach. It's because they happen to be particularly capable in the military sphere. They're all giburim, they're all heroes. Bazazu anshe hatzava chelik murubem mikol hashvatim. And when they had just what we had read about recently in the Torah, right before this, the battle with Midian, they were particularly successful in that battle. And as a result of the spoils of that battle, they came away with a disproportionate amount of cattle. And so that explains, according to the Or HaChaim, there's Rabbi Myers. According to
Hi, Shalom Aleichem. Just checking to see everything's running okay.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
Thank you very much. So the Or HaChaim
check out now. I'm gonna check out, and I just wanted to check to see everything technically was fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. Bye. So that's the Or HaChaim's explanation of why it is that these two tribes came, because they happen to have a disproportionate amount of cattle. By the way, I don't know why Rabbi Myers inspired me to this, but I'm sure that people are aware. Everybody knows what's going on in Israel?
Yes.
You follow the news, right? The Israeli army is...
I don't know if I know up to the minute.
Yeah, so neither do I. But the Israeli army has entered into Gaza, and what I'd like to do is dedicate our learning this evening to the success of the army of the nation of Israel, and the soldiers should do what they have to do and to come back safe.
Amen.
Okay, so that's the explanation the Or HaChaim gives, that they had more cattle than other people because of their military prowess. Now, it could be that there's a slightly different reason, that maybe they don't have more cattle, but maybe the attitude towards the cattle is different, and we'll see that as we go on. Now, I'd like to move on to the second and main question we're going to analyze, and that is to understand the incredibly intense reaction that Moshe had to their request. Now, his response needs to be looked at on two different levels. One level is the text, what he actually said, what Moshe said, and the second is subtle hints of a kind of subtext of what Moshe was saying, something which is deeper and more subtle than what he explicitly said. So we're going to open up our Chumashim here. So if you have your Chumash in front of you, and we're now in the book of Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers, in chapter 32. And I'd like to just very quickly take a look at his response, at Moshe's response. Right? So the Reuben and Gad come to Moshe and say, we have a lot of cattle. This is good cattle territory, and we'd like to stick around here. So if you take a look starting in verse 6. Everybody with me? Verse 6. So let's read quickly. Vayomer Moshe livnei Gad livnei Reuven. Moshe said to Gad and Reuven, the two tribes, Ha'achechem yavo lemilchama. Your brother's going to go to war. V'atem teshvu fo, and you're going to sit here. V'lama tiniun et lei b'nei Yisrael. Why you demoralize the Jewish people? Me'avor el Yarden el ha'aretz asher natan lahem Hashem. That to prevent them from going to the land that the Lord has given them. Ko asu avotechem. Your forefathers did the exact same thing. V'shalchi otam mikadesh barnea. When I sent them from Kadesh Barnea, lerot et haaretz, to see the land. Of course, to whom is he referring to when he says your forefathers did the same thing? Who are those forefathers?
The Meraglim.
The Meraglim, the spies. So he invokes the spies. That we remember what we said. We talked about the microstructure, the macro, I should say, of the book of Bamidbar, the thread which weaves itself through this great tragedy. The tragedy begins with the Meraglim, with the spies, and it's hovering over people's heads. It's in people's consciousness, especially Moshe, who's leading this whole affair here. So you're no different than your forefathers. I thought the idea was Moshe's thinking that we're now raising a new generation, which is now constitutionally different. Oh my God. And look at you. You're just like them. Vayalu ad Nachal Eshkol. He now recounts what happened, that they had gone up to the place Nachal Eshkol, Vayiru et haaretz, that they saw the land, V'yaniu et lei b'nei Yisrael, that they then demoralized the Jewish people, Levilti vo el haaretz asher natan lahem Hashem, that they will not now be able to go to the land that God has given them. Vayichar af Hashem bayom hahu, and God became so angry, Vayishava lemor, and God swore, saying, Im yiru anashim ha'olim miMitzrayim miben 20 shana v'mala, that the Jewish people from the years of 20 years old, when they left Egypt, they will not see the land that the Lord has promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Ki lo mil'u acharai. They have not obeyed me. Except for Bilti Caleb ben Yefuneh, HaKenize veYoshua ben Nun, except for these two people, Yoshua and Caleb, for they did follow me. And then just to quickly finish it off, I'll just sort of paraphrase it in English. And God was angry at Israel, and they were caused to wander in the desert for the 40 years until the end of that generation who had done evil in the eyes of the Lord. V'hinei, we're now in verse 14, Kamtem tachat avotechem tarbut anashim chata'im. Now you, who were supposed to be this new generation, you've arisen with the same rot as that generation, that sinful generation. to add even more anger against the Jewish people. We're going to have the same results that happened before, that just like the Jewish people had to die off and a new generation be created, now that's going to happen now. What's going to be now? You have destroyed this people. Okay. That is not subtle response at all, obviously. I hope you sense that. Now, I want to ask the question, what is Moshe thinking is the motive of the Jewish people, or Reuben and God, I should say, when they ask this question? What did Moshe think their intent was when they say, we'd like to stay here because we're in the cattle business? So there's a really interesting debate between two of the Meforshim, two of the biblical commentators on this particular issue. What did Moshe think when they made this request? So I have the two views here. If you want to take a look on your source sheet on the second page, the first view is from the Akedat Yitzchak, Rabbi Yitzchak Arama, a 16th century Spanish biblical commentator. And let's take a look at what he says. First of all, L'chaim. He says the following. Amar lahem, ki chesronam bevitchonam al Hashem unifilat hamorach bilibam. Moshe was thinking that when they made this request, it was flowing from their lack of trust in God and, in fact, their lack of courage. Well, that exactly is a reflection of the spiritual state of whom, going back 38 years, who suffered from lack of trust in God and lack of courage?
Meraglim.
The Meraglim, the spies. Mm-hmm. So this very much is a nice reflection of, that's what Moshe said in terms of his text. Those are the words he said. You're like the spies. Now, just going to skip a little bit down into the fifth line in the way my text is laid out of the Akedat Yitzchak. He said, and it seems that just like Moshe suspected, so was the truth in terms of what was going on in their heart. In other words, Moshe really thought that they were cowards who suffered from lack of trust in God. And this commentator, Rabbi Yitzchak Arama, says, and he thinks it's true, when they made that request, we'd like to stay here, that in fact they were suffering from a lack of trust in God and cowardice, and that's, besides the economic reason, that's why they wanted to stay on the east bank of the Jordan River. And therefore, he goes on, they really were not intending to participate in the battle. That was a change of intent on their part. They first were not going to participate. When Moshe then says, are you crazy? You're going to stay here and your brother's going to go fight? And they say, okay, plan B. We'll go fight and then come back. According to Sefer HaKadosh, that really is plan B. That wasn't the original intent. And when they say, V'zeh masha amar al tavirenu yarden, when they say, and this is the very powerful words, al tavirenu yarden, don't cause us to cross over the Jordan. Like, we're not going. Those words, they meant literally, we're not going. You, adios, you go. We're staying here. That's what they meant. We're not participating in the battle. And now he adds something which is just so beautiful when you see the Meforshim, how sensitive they were to the language in the Torah. You know, after Moshe has this fit, I don't mean to say that in a disrespectful way. Moshe gets extremely upset. So they then come back with a reformulated request, right? Okay, we'll go and participate in the battle and come back. So if you take a look at that, of how the Torah describes that. So we're now the chapter Lamed Bet, chapter 32, verse 16. So when they come back with their reformulation, the Torah says, Vayikshu elav vayomru. They approached him and they said, we'll make cattle pens and cities for our kids here, keep them here. V'anachnu nechaletz, and then we will go as the vanguard for the battle. Okay. Now, you see, when you read this text superficially, it's all part of a discussion that's happening all together. They come to Moshe. They make their request. Moshe gets upset. They reformulate their request. It's all one discussion between Moshe and the tribes of Reuven and Gad. So therefore, it's hard to understand when the Torah says, Vayikshu elav vayomru, that they approached him and they said, what's they approached him? They're having a discussion around the negotiating table right there. They make their request, Moshe responds, and then they reformulate their request. What's Vayikshu elav? They approached him. So the Akedat Yitzchak is sensitive to that word. And he says the following, take a look at the text. Ve'od ki lo ne'amar vayomru elav. It doesn't just say that they then said to Moshe, we'll build pens for the cattle and cities for our children, and then go and fight and come back. Ella vayikshu elav vayomru. It says they approached him and said, Demashma, that seems to imply, sheshamu dvarav v'nityatzu eleihem, that they heard what he said, and then they had to huddle. They went to their own conference room, and they schmoozed. Oh my gosh. Whoa, he really got upset. This is not working. And therefore, maybe we have to rethink our original plan. And then they go back and return to him with their answer. So that's the Akedat Yitzchak's proof or indication in the text that the original intent was horrible, that they were they had a lack of trust in God, they had a lack of courage, they were planning on not participating in the battle, but they changed their plan as a result of Moshe's opposition. Now, the Ramban understands this differently. The Ramban says, and you can take a look at your text, V'hinei Moshe chashad otam, ki yomru chen mi pachad anshe eretz Canaan, shamru bahem u'meraglim lo nuchal alot el ha'am ki chazaku mimenu. He says the Moshe suspected, in fact, that they were just like the spies. They lacked trust in God and they lacked courage. But according to the Ramban, that in fact it was a suspicion which wasn't true. Let's just skip a few words. Ulekach anu oto. That's why Reuven and Gad, these two tribes, they respond and they say, Chalila shenira mehem. God forbid that we're afraid of the Canaanites, that we're afraid of battle. You misread our intent. Our intent was never to stay here and you guys go fight the battle. No, that was not our intent at all. We will go as the vanguard to battle. Not only that, but it says that they're going to become chalutzim. What are the chalutzim? They're the first, the pioneers. They're going to be the, I don't know what to call them, the Delta Squad, or I don't know, whatever it is. They're going to be the elite commandos that go in first. So according to Ramban, Moshe thought that their intent was not to go in, but that was their intent from the first, in their first request. But then there's a question. So what does it mean when they said these horrible words? Lo ta'avirenu et Yarden. Don't cause us to cross the Jordan. What did that mean? So the Ramban explains, it's simple. That wasn't referring to the conquest. That was referring to the settling.
Right.
Don't cause us to cross the Jordan in terms of the ultimate settling. This is going to become our territorial allotment. That's what it means. Don't cause us to cross the Jordan. As far as the battle goes, of course. And so they were simply clarifying their intent. So explains the Ramban. Now, Rabbi Hanan Porat, who's a contemporary rabbi here in Israel, who died just a few years ago, a wonderful teacher. And he says the following: the truth of the matter is that whether or not their intent was, as the Akedat Yitzchak explains, that they in fact didn't lack didn't have courage. And their intent was not to, originally, to conquer the land along with their brothers. Or, like the Ramban explains, that their intent was always to participate in the battle. That words have a power. When they utter the words, Al Tavrina Yardain, don't cause us to cross the Jordan. I don't care what they were thinking. When you use words like that, those words have a power that will demoralize the entire nation. The fact that in their hearts, they were always assuming they'd participate in the battle, it doesn't matter. When you say words like that, those words have an impact. It's not so you should say what you're thinking, and you have to be very careful about that because words can have a very devastating impact upon morale. Now, I want to briefly address what's so terrible. And I'm going to say a question which I think people wonder why I'm even asking it. What would be so terrible if, in fact, worst case scenario happened? You know what? Those Canaanites, they're scary. And how about the entire Jewish people settle on the east bank of the Jordan River? They've already conquered that. And people settle down, and they'll become nice Orthodox Jews living in Teaneck, Sacramento, Seattle, Paris. That's so terrible. After all, when people think of the notion of religion, so religion is something that regulates the way we live our lives as individuals, our vision of the world in terms of belief in God. You can't do that in Seattle. I don't know. It seems to be I got on my screen some wonderful Jews here. I was told by Rabbi Myers that he checked everybody out first. Quality control here, and everybody fits the bill here. So what's so terrible about that? So that might sound like a crazy question, but it's something that people need to be reminded of. Let's just go back to first principles. You know, this whole story begins when God appears to Abraham, tells him to leave everything he's familiar with and to go to the land of Israel. And he tells him that go to the land of Israel. He doesn't actually name it by name because maybe it would have been Beverly Hills. Maybe Abraham was hopeful. Even San Diego would have been pretty nice. But whatever, it turned out to be in a kind of a bad neighborhood, the Middle East there. And in any case, God says, I'm going to make you into a great nation. And all the nations of the earth, all the families of the earth are going to be blessed by you. Leave everything you're familiar with. Go to this land. You're going to become a great nation. And that great nation will be a blessing for all humanity. Now, how will that nation be a blessing for all humanity? The Torah tells us again in the book of Shemot, chapter 19, that God says to the Jewish people, I don't want you to be religious only, from people. No, that's not the idea. It has to be much more than that. I want you to be a mamlechet kohanim, a kingdom of priests. Think about that expression for a second. Kingdom of priests. Mamlechet kohanim, kingdom of priests. A kingdom is not a couple of Jews in Sacramento or Teaneck, right? Living lives as individuals. A kingdom means a nation in its land. But not just any nation. What kind of nation? A nation of priests. And the intent there is very clear. If we create a kingdom of priests, what's going to be the impact upon the world? All the world be blessed by this kingdom of priests. How so? It's very clear. I'm just reminding you of something everybody here knows. People here are parents. People here work with colleagues. You know what it's like to live in society. When you want to influence other people, you can preach all you want to. At the end of the day, what's the only thing that really works? By setting an example. God's vision is we're going to repair the world. We're going to repair the world, not by being a bunch of pious Jews as individuals, you know, Americans of the Jewish persuasion, French people of the Jewish persuasion, etc., who observe very pious lives as individuals. No, we're going to create a nation as a nation. And that nation is going to bring godliness both into the private sphere and the public sphere, not just eating kosher food and keeping Shabbat, but a whole nation that its political system, its economic system, the way its army operates, everything is in light of God's will. And that nation of priests, that Mamlechet Kohanim, will then, through its example, transform the world. When God's presence permeates not only the lives of individuals, but the life of an entire nation, both on the micro level and the macro level. So now I think you can appreciate, based upon this little reminder, why what the two tribes did or could have done in terms of the demoralizing of the nation to not enter the land was such a tragedy. It would have been a betrayal of Jewish destiny, a fundamental betrayal of Jewish destiny. Do you appreciate that? So you can appreciate where Moshe had a fit. It's a betrayal of the agenda given to Avraham, of the entire covenant. Okay, now I want to move on. Now, by the way, if we need to go a few minutes further, do we have time? If we needed to go till...
Fine with me.
Okay, so if we needed to go even till 9 o'clock, that would work for people? You won't fall asleep or have to go to work? You're on the night shift in the hospital? Okay, good, because we may need a little bit more time. So that's in terms of the explicit message of Moshe, the actual text. Now, what I want to do now is take a look at the subtext of Moshe's very negative response to what they said. And I'm basing this part of our discussion very much on the insights of Nechama Leibowitz, one of the great teachers of Torah from our generation, died also a few years ago. And her insights, of course, are based upon the previous commentators and especially our sages. She points out the following. What a wonderful insight. When you take a look at the very first sentence of how the Jewish people, Reuven and God, that is, present their request to Moshe. Very first sentence. How do they begin it? They say, this is verse 1 in chapter 32. Umikne Rav Hayal Livnei Reuven Livnei God. Atzum Ma'od. Great cattle. I'm translating this very literally to get the idea across. Was to the tribes of Reuven and God, extremely multitudinous. Vayuat Eretz Yazer v'et Eretz Gilad, and they saw this land where they were now on the east bank of the Jordan River. V'hinei hamakom makom mikneh, and behold, the land was a place of cattle. So the very first word in their request is mikneh, cattle, and the very last word in their request in that first sentence is mikneh, cattle. You know, that you see the symmetry? There's like bookends. That their request is bookended by what word? Mikneh, cattle. Now, for those of you who know a little bit of Hebrew, the word mikneh, which is translated here cattle, that's a good translation. The root seems to be kuf nun hey, right? Kana. What does kana mean? Kinyan. What does that word mean? Anybody help me out there? Does anybody know? Koneh?
An acquirement.
An acquirement.
Acquiring something.
Excellent. An acquisition. It means to buy something, to acquire something. So the very first word and the very last word in this first sentence of the request is acquisition. So what's the Torah doing? The Torah is saying, and Moshe understood this. Moshe was this great psychologist. He understood every nuance. People used to talk about how certain great rabbis, like the most recent Lubavitcher Rebbe, they would look at you and people felt like your soul was being read. Moshe was the same. You can't hide from Moshe, right? The very first word is acquisition, and the very last word is acquisition. Moshe smells something rotten. What's at the very pinnacle of the values of these two tribes that come to make their request? Stuff, goods, right? They're motivated, in addition to any potential cowardness, right? That's a debate between Rabbi Yitzhak Arama, the Akedat Yitzhak, and the Ramban, whether they're really cowards or not. But in addition to that element, which is a little bit ambiguous, they're motivated by a corrupt value system, which is this inordinate emphasis on the good life. All right, maybe I should say the goods life. Goods. Stuff. Right? Okay. Now, let's go on. We're going to take a look at an incredible analysis that contrasts the reformulation of their request, right? Moshe gets upset and they say, okay, we're going to do it this way. We'll participate in the battle and come back. And then Moshe, if you read it superficially, Moshe says, yeah, great. It's a deal. And then the episode ends by describing the land that they received on the east bank of the Jordan River. So if you have your sheets in front of you, I was able to scan and print a wonderful contrast that Nechama Leibowitz did here, contrasting how the tribes reformulated their request, and Moshe, who says, yeah, good idea. But look more carefully. Everybody ready? We'll just read this in English real quick. Listen to the request that they made, reformulated, and then Moshe's acceptance. The tribes. And they came near and said unto him, we will build sheepfolds here for our cattle and cities for our little ones. But we ourselves will go ready armed before the children of Israel until we have brought them to their place. And our little ones shall dwell in the fenced cities because of the inhabitants of the land. We will not return into our houses until the children of Israel have inherited every man his inheritance. For we will not inherit with them on yonder side of Jordan or forward, because our inheritance is fallen to us on this side of the Jordan River eastward. Okay, that's what they say. That's the reformulation of the request, and Moshe accepts it. But now listen to Moshe's echoing of their reformulated request. And you tell me if this is merely echoing. Listen to the words. And Moshe said unto them, if you will do what you just said, if you will go armed before the Lord to war, and will go all of you armed over Jordan before the Lord, until he hath driven out his enemies before him, and the land be subdued before the Lord, then afterwards you shall return and be guiltless before the Lord and before Israel, and this land shall be your possession before the Lord. But if you will not do so, behold, you have sinned against the Lord, and be sure your sin will find you out. Build your cities for your little ones, and folds for your sheep, and do that which hath proceeded out of your mouth. Now, I was trying to be not too subtle in that. What do you notice is he is not simply echoing what the tribes had then offered him as a reformulation of the request. What phrase just jumps off the page and bites you in the nose? Help me out. Before the Lord. Do you notice that they don't once, in the reformulation of their request, mention God's name? To them, it's a business deal. They're just negotiating. Moshe said, it's not fair. You guys are going to stay here and we're going to go there. So they answer, yeah, get your point. Okay. Okay, well, either you misunderstood us or yeah, we changed our mind. We're going to go. That's the debate between Ramban and Rabbi Yitzchak Harama. We'll go and participate in the conquest and come back. And Moshe says, oh my God, there's like a business deal here? Is that what's going on here? That's not what's going on here. You suffer from a horrible internal rot. Your internal rot is that you are not God-centered. This is not a debate between two human parties to simply find a position which is mutually agreeable by both sides. No, this is an issue between you and God. Before the Lord, and if you disobey against the Lord. This is not simply business here. This is, are you truly God-centered or are you goods-centered? Everybody got that? Are you God-centered or goods-centered? That's what's going on here, okay? And there's one more subtle point, and Rashi already points this out. And and what's so wonderful about this is when you read the text superficially, Moshe just says, yeah, good idea. It's not that at all. The next point that, again, Rashi makes, and you see it here again, when they say, okay, we got you, Moshe, here's what we're going to do. We're going to build pens, corrals for our sheep, and places for our kids, and then we'll go participate in the battle. Take a look at what Moshe says, the very last verse there. Build your cities for your little ones and folds for your sheep. Did you notice a difference? They say
the order.
The order. They have to protect two things when they go to battle. Their goods and their kids. So, and they do it in that order. That's what they say. And Moshe says, oh, yeah, okay, but not okay. Worry about your kids, then your goods. Again, in this very subtle way, Moshe understands that there's a terrible rot there, that not only are they not sufficiently God-centered and they're goods-centered, even when it comes to the priority of their goods versus their kids, there's a fundamental corruption here. Now, the question is, does this story have a happy ending? So, superficially it does. They say, they reformulate their request. Moshe makes some subtle changes, right? Essentially echoes it, but with very subtle and profound changes in terms of values. And they seem to agree, and everybody lived happily ever after. But I want to show you something. There are a lot of indications that this story doesn't have a happy ending. How so? So, because the hour is late, I'm going to sort of paraphrase some texts instead of looking at the text themselves. Number one, when they agree to do what Moshe says, they end their acquiescence to Moshe's response by saying that we're going to go out to war, kasher Adoni dover. This is verse 37. Kasher Adoni dover. The word Adoni means my master. And to whom are they referring to here when they say we will do? Referring to Moshe. Now it's interesting, of course, the way we pronounce God's name is that same word. Right? Slight difference. Adoni and the other way. And it strikes the ear of the reader that when they say, yes, we will do, to whom are they acquiescing? To Moshe.
Not God.
Not God. This is all just business to them, right? They haven't really fundamentally reoriented their values and their sensibilities. They're not God-centered. They're good-centered still. And when they finally agree, it's because kasher Adoni dover, the boss, like the boss says. We're going to do what the boss says. Okay, that's number one. Number two, and this is what I'm going to share with you right now, is the Seforno points out, and it's in your source sheet. When they agree to do what Moshe says, it's pretty clear in the text. They say, yes, Moshe, okay, give us the land. Now, we're going to go and fight and come back. Moshe says, no. You're going to go fight and come back. If you fulfill the condition of fighting, when you come back, I'll give you the land. But I'm not giving you title to the land. There's not going to be any deed of sale until you come back. The way they formulate is we want to sign the deed of sale right now. And then when we come back, we'll be able to live in the land we've already bought, as it were. And Moshe, his idea is no, the deed of sale will be signed when you come back. The interesting thing is that Moshe, if you look carefully at the text, so chapter 32, verse 28 and 33, you'll see it yourselves, Moshe gives in. And the Sephorno just points out that Moshe there's only so much you can put up with. It's the way our kids work on us. They just keep badgering until we finally give in. So Moshe just okay, have it your way. Because he just became exhausted. That's how the Sephorno explains it. But we see from there again is that there's some kind of fundamental rod here that instead of saying, you're right, Moshe, we're going to do what we say, and then we'll get our reward later, they say, no, we want the goods now, and then we'll do what we're supposed to do. Okay. Third point. If you take a look in Sefer Yehoshua, the book of Joshua, chapter 22, it's a very interesting incident that's described there. And that is they built the tribe of Reuben and Gad, who in fact do settle on that side of the border. So they build an altar, a sacrificial altar. The other tribes go crazy because they interpret that as, look at them. They really do not feel themselves part of the entire Jewish nation. Because if anything represents the centrality of the Jewish nation and the centrality of Eretz Israel, it is the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and the Beit HaMikdash, and what's eventually is built into the Holy Temple. That becomes the central focus of our spiritual lives. And now they've built one in their territory as a competing focus of worship. They really do not feel part of Jewish destiny. And as a matter of fact, Yehoshua is so upset. Joshua's upset. He sends a delegation that says, we're going to go to war over this. Be a civil war. They actually back down and they say, oh, no. It's not what you think it is. It's just a monument. It's not meant to be a sacrificial altar. And Yehoshua says, okay, but I hope that's true, and you better learn your lesson. So that incident also seems to indicate that the flaws which Moshe sensed, the great fears that Moshe sensed in their request, those issues never really changed fundamentally. They were always lurking right beneath the surface. Another issue, which is a sort of halachic reflection of Reuven and Gad, and that is that we have a midrash that says that because the tribes Reuven and Gad took the possession of their lands in a way which wasn't so kosher, therefore the mitzvah of bringing first fruits doesn't apply to them. Because the mitzvah of first fruits, when the farmers bring their first fruits to the temple, they say, we've been taken out of Egypt. God took care of us in the wilderness. He brought us to the land that he promised us. And now we've become farmers, and here's our first fruits. They can't say that because they weren't part of the kind of intended trajectory of how the Jewish people would inherit the land. They just grabbed land which seemed to play into their economic interests. And therefore, the Midrash explains that therefore the mitzvah of first fruits doesn't apply to those territories on the east bank of the Jordan River. Furthermore, something fascinating. When anybody talks about the request of Reuven and Gad, people don't say Reuven Gad. They say Reuven Gad and, help me out?
Half of Manasseh.
Half of Manasseh. What happened to half of? We've been talking about them at all. And indeed, if you look at narrative, the narrative focuses on Reuven and Gad, the whole story, Reuven and Gad. Except for at the very end, chapter 30, verse 33. So there it says, I think it was verse 33. So there it says, all of a sudden, that Moshe said, okay, we're going to give you this land to Reuven, Gad, and half tribe of Manasseh. You remember the map I showed you? If you take a look at that map really dramatizes the issue here. Manasseh, it's a big tribe.
Oh.
And they go from the Mediterranean all the way to the Jordan River. And then from the Jordan River all the way to the country of Jordan, the nowadays country of Jordan, right? So where'd they come from? They weren't part of the request. So one of the commentators points out, it's a beautiful idea. Moshe, he understands that this, it's not like Reuven and Gad did tshuva. There's a fundamental rot here which is not fully repaired. And he wants to do everything to be able to create a kind of safety belt that they'll retain their fundamental identification with the Jewish nation and its destiny. So here was the idea. Take one tribe, and the tribe of Manasseh, and that tribe will become part of the confederation of Reuven and Gad on the east bank of the Jordan River. But the tribe of Manasseh will also be fundamentally connected to the west bank of the Jordan River because they're all one family, Manasseh, and it's going to be divided between this big stretch of land between the Mediterranean and the Jordan, and then the Jordan eastward, and then connected to Reuven and Gad. By having half the tribe of Manasseh in a confederation with Reuven and Gad, and then Manasseh being sort of the glue which attaches them to the Jewish people on the west bank of the Jordan River, that will create some type of encouragement to be part of the Jewish people's destiny. Everybody follow this idea? That's how the half a tribe of Manasseh comes in there. It was put in there in order to try to ensure that Reuven and Gad would not become some type of separate nation following their own economic agenda, but would be integrated into the destiny of the Jewish people as a whole. Okay, now, if you'll give me now just 1 minute, I want to show you the ultimate affirmation of the fact that the kind of spiritual rot in the souls of Reuven and Gad was not really corrected. And this is a midrash, which is also in your short source sheets. So the midrash explains that God gives us certain gifts. I'll sort of just paraphrase the beginning. And those gifts that we have, if we don't use them, lifnei Hashem, in the spirit of God, if we don't recognize that those gifts are godly gifts, then in fact, those gifts will in fact evaporate. And the Midrash talks about the gift of intelligence, the gift of strength, the gift of possessions, of goods. And the example it gives in terms of goods is the tribes of Reuven and Gad. I'll just read to you those last few words in English. Likewise, in the case of the children of Reuven and Gad, you find that they were rich, possessing large numbers of cattle, but they loved their money and settled outside the land of Israel. Consequently, they were the first of all the tribes to go into exile, as is borne out by the text in the book of Divrei Hayamim, Chronicles, quote, and God carried them away, even the Reubenites and the Gadites, tribes of Reuben and Gad, and the half a tribe of Manasseh. They were the first to be exiled. In the first exile by the Babylonians, before that, they were exiled. Reuben and Gad were the first tribes to be kicked out of the land. And the Midrash says, what brought it on them? The fact that they separated themselves from their brethren because of their possessions. And the Midrash concludes, how do we know that? Because of the way they introduced their whole request, where as we saw before, the very first word was umikne rav, a lot of acquisitions we have, and a lot of cattle, right? And this is land which is appropriate for mikne, acquisitions, cattle. So that's the ultimate affirmation, unfortunately, that the rot which is in the souls and the value priorities of Reuven and Gad was not really fundamentally corrected, and that's why they were, in fact, the first to be exiled. And now just to summarize, with this will end, we've seen this analysis on the macro historical level of the distortion that can take place within the way we lead our lives as a collective, where our priority is on the good life, the good life, rather than the godly life, and how that can threaten the destiny of the Jewish people. That's not only true with the Jewish people, it's true with us as individuals. We're always making decisions. What's our compass? What's our lodestar? What's guiding us? By what criteria do we make decisions? And I don't say this in an easy fashion. It's a struggle. Are we motivated by godly considerations or by our goods? The desire to be comfortable, desire to be surrounded by nice things, the desire to feel financially secure? Or do we make decisions that are hard and scary because we want to follow the divine will and play out our destiny as Jews, as part of the Jewish nation? That's something we experience every day in decisions we make, and that experience is what is exemplified by this story at the end of Parshat Matot. I want to wish you a wonderful, wonderful Shabbat. It was so nice to learn Torah with you, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, and thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you, Rabbi Zeff.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rabbi Zeff.
You're welcome. You're welcome.